Hello, everyone, and welcome to what is already the 18th edition of our Disruptive Fridays series. My name is Lieke Ploeger, and I'm directing the community program of the Disruption Network Lab, and I'll be hosting today's Disruptive Fridays session. So, as we were just saying, it's already almost a year that we've been running Disruptive Fridays, this online conversation series. And yeah, I'm very excited for the topic today because we're going to be discussing reimagining community, collective learning, and creative mentoring. And I'm really happy to speak today with some of our project partners from the Reimagine Europe project. And this is a European collaborative project which has been running since 2017. And with the Disruption Lab, we've been joining it since 2019. And also, the project is supporting this series together with the European Cultural Foundation Culture of Solidarity Fund. So in Reimagine Europe, there's different cultural organizations working together on addressing social and political challenges that we're facing today, which of course a lot of new ones came up now because of the coronavirus pandemic of the last year. Also, an important focus for Reimagine Europe is to explore new ways to open up and invite audiences as participants or producers, co-curators or protagonists, and to build and expand networks with new and existing communities. So in this edition, we will focus on two of those examples of community work in Reimagine Europe. And we will speak about community engagement, collective learning, and creative mentoring with Erin James, who's connected to the art charity and an art space Lighthouse in Brighton in the UK, and Scott Elliot of the landmark Bergen Kunsthall from Norway. And yeah, before we start, just a short reminder that you're also very welcome to join the chat, which you can find on our website. And you can type there your questions for the speakers at any time, and we will collect them for the Q&A later on. And you can also post comments or links or, of course, engage with each other. And yeah, please don't wait until the very end with your questions, because then it will be hard to address them all. Then I'm very happy to introduce the first speaker of today, which is Erin James. She's a published photographer, photojournalist, writer, poet, radio host, DJ, curator, and founder of Tough Cookie magazine. And she will share more today on how she has kickstarted her career through the Lighthouse Young Creatives program in 2020. So during the last year, while working, of course, like many of us from home, she has launched a small business. She became a host for Brighton's first next gen breakfast show and also started a collaboration with a local art gallery. So yeah, I'm very excited to hear more from you, Erin, and over to you.
Hiya, thank you so much. Can you hear me okay? Great. Thanks for that lovely introduction. I'm really happy to be here. It's great to still have events going on during this difficult time and connect globally as well. So yeah, I'm in Brighton, UK right now. But yeah, so I wanted to start off by talking about the Lighthouse Young Creatives Mentorship Scheme, which you just mentioned. Um, So basically, it was like a 6-month mentorship scheme that I applied to and I got into, which I was really happy about. And it was an opportunity just for young creatives who maybe wanted a little bit of a boost in their career to have access to mentors, to equipment, to studio spaces, just kind of really explore with anything and everything that they wanted to create. It was a really amazing opportunity because it was the first time I'd been in a sort of educational setting where uh, there was sort of no limits to creativity, and you could sort of approach a mentor and say, look, this is what I want to do. This is what I've got in my head. Can we make it happen? Is it possible? And 9 times out of 10, they would say yes, which was amazing. So, for example, I was really interested in long exposure shots and shoots, which is basically where you have your camera and you set the shutter speed to like a really long period of time so that the light stays open and it creates sort of like a bit of a wavy effect and you can get multiple sort of shots.
Ooh, I think we might have lost connection, Erin. So maybe yeah, see if it's she's back, I think. Not yet. Maybe while we sort out the connection of Erin, we can first move to Scott and then we come back to Erin a bit later, even though it's not nice to cut off now because we was just getting into the story. But I'm sure that while we hear from Scott, in the meantime, we will have Erin also back with us. So a little bit of a cliffhanger. So, Scott, if you're ready, then we will do your presentation first and then we come back to Erin in just a moment.
Hi.
It
I
seems
think
she's
Erin is
here again
back.
now. So no
I'm so
cliffhanger,
sorry
sorry.
about
We
that.
go straight back to Erin. Happy to have you
Yeah, I'm
back
so
again.
sorry. Thank you. I've just moved house, and the Wi-Fi is so temperamental, so I do apologize for that. But I'm just gonna
No
just
worries.
start where I left off. So with the long exposure shoots, it was something that I'd never ever done. We had access to a studio, and they were like, "Okay, let's do this." They got the photographer mentor to teach us sort of how to do it. We set it up, and we took photos, and that was done within the same day. So it was just this amazing process of having this idea and being able to really make it a creation. So from there, I started to kind of quickly realize that anything that I wanted to do could be possible. I think going to school and going to college, maybe because of teachers or because of my own sort of lack of vision or belief in myself, I never really thought that I would have like the power as one person to make something or launch a business. But this mentorship scheme really proved otherwise. Um, so the goal was to make a final project, and I decided to use it to launch a business because I kind of thought to myself, this is the only time in my life where I'm going to have 6 months where I can really spend my time on one thing and focus on one thing, and why leave it at one project? Why not, make that into something more? So I was introduced to the concept of zines, which are basically mini magazines. They're really accessible to make. You can make them at home. You don't even need to print them. You can just literally make them from paper with scissors and crayons, whatever. And I do a lot of things. I do writing, I do photography, I do poetry, I do graphic design. So for me, it was a really exciting way to combine all of my skills and passions into one publication. So that's how I launched Tough Cookie Mag. Uh, they gave us £200 towards our final project. It wasn't a lot of money, so I invested all in just printing everything on my own. The first one I think was about 30 or 40 pages, and I don't know, I just put my heart and soul and everything that I had into it and managed to kind of make a business from it. It launched during the first lockdown, which was really difficult because the mentorship scheme was still going on and we kind of had to finish it over Zoom. And Zoom was a new platform back then. No one really knew how to use it. And we didn't have that face to face access with mentors that was so important, or, the use of equipment. But, we managed. Um, so yeah, I did a few print tests and finally kind of got happy with where I was with the designs. I collaborated with some amazing artists, a lot of them who were actually in that scheme, which was like a great thing about the mentorship scheme because there was just a group of artists in one space that could all help each other out with their projects. Um, and yeah, just through Instagram, social media, email lists, using and accessing as many contacts as I could, I launched it. And I actually think, in a weird way, that lockdown helped my business because it came at a time where people really needed something to focus on and they needed something uplifting. And for those that don't know, Tough Cookie Mag is centered around uplifting and championing marginalised voices and sharing stories from underrepresented artists and groups. So it started off as a way for me to empower myself, and kind of with the force of fantasy and creating sort of a better imagined reality through the pages of the zine. That's kind of how it started, and it kind of went on to just doing that. It talks a lot about mental health. It talks a lot about trauma, and these are all things that I think were elevated because of the pandemic anyway, and entering such a scary time. So I think weirdly enough, it helped my business. So it's almost a year later. I'm working on the fourth issue at the moment, which is almost finished. And I'm in collaboration with an amazing art gallery in Brighton called Seas, the socially engaged art salon, where I'm making a zine a month in response to all of their exhibitions. They have a very similar ethos to Tough Cookie, so it's been working really well. But I think going back to kind of the theme of this talk and how we can disrupt toxic systems in which we live in, I think the main thing that I want people to take away from what I've done, launching a business as one person, is that you don't necessarily always need a team around you. it certainly helps and make things a lot easier. But I'm just one person, and I have been one person for a very long time. And I genuinely believe that I have shaped and helped people's lives, including my own, through this magazine. So I think the world can be a very daunting, a very scary place, especially at the moment. Um, but I think it's really about destroying this narrative that we have to do everything together. Of course, when we come together, we're much stronger. But if you're one person, like, don't stop that from making you think that you can't make a change. Because my sort of ethos that I live by now is if everyone can make a change locally, a small change, then we can literally all change the world together. That's kind of how I feel. And also briefly touching on this idea of activism. Um, Last year, I created issue of my zine called the All Black Everything Edition, which was in response to sort of the resurfacing of the Black Lives Matter movement. So it kind of came at a time where a lot of people were a lot more open to listen to the struggles of Black people and the Black community. So I kind of took advantage of that and wanted to promote Black joy in a time where there was a lot of Black trauma going on, and use it to uplift myself and my community. Um, and that was life changing for me. It gave me so much healing internally, and I would like to think it helped the artists that also collaborated and the readers who read it. So I think, art can be used as activism. It doesn't have to be protesting in the streets. You don't have to be at a government level. You don't have to have a lot of contacts. I think, the idea that I really want people to take away from this is, you might feel like you're just one person and that you don't have much power, but if you can change that mindset and we can all do that together, I think we have a lot more power than we think. I think we've always had that power, but we've kind of been taught and conditioned that we don't, so that we stay silent and we stay conditioned. But I guess I'm here to tell you that we need to disrupt that narrative, and we need to uplift ourselves and others around us. Do I have
Thank you so much,
more
Erin.
time, or I think
If
I
you want
spoke
to,
for about 10 minutes.
I actually I wanted to ask you a question, but of course that has to happen at least once every edition that you forget to mute the microphone. So I was saying,
Yeah, I'll go for
thanks
it.
for. I was saying thanks for your beautiful message. I think that's a really powerful story about how one person can actually make a difference, and it's not always needed to have like a lot of systems or organization behind it, but you can actually already make a start. I just wanted to ask you, because I think it's quite also an interesting link to this message, why you named the magazine Tough Cookie, and what you see as a tough
Yeah,
cookie and why you called it that.
yeah. Let me see if I can get. I did actually write a bit. I can probably remember it. So basically, I struggled with the name for a long time. I thought about lots of different names, but um, I think it happened where one day I went to visit my mum. Me and my mum are really close, and we've been through a lot together. And she just kind of looked at me and she was like, "God, Erin, you are such a tough cookie." And I was like, "Yes, I am." And I think, it's just this idea of being a tough cookie. For those that don't know, it's just like a saying of, someone who's a tough cookie, they're resilient, they have strength, um, they they can get through things. I've unfortunately experienced a lot of trauma in my life, but that's made me who I am today, and it's made me a tough cookie. And I think that talking about stigmatized subjects, hard to talk about subjects, uncomfortable subjects, makes myself and anyone else that's contributed to this magazine, this publication, a tough cookie. Um, and I don't know, I like the ring that it has.
Yeah, I think it's a great name, and also, I would definitely encourage people to check the zine online, and also they can either get the paper or the digital copy, and it looks really
Yeah,
awesome.
so I've got I've got most I've got a lot of international shipping to Europe, but I've also got a digital version for those who maybe can't afford the shipping, who live overseas, or just want a more affordable option. It should come up if you just Google Tough Cookie Mag. As I'm also the same on Instagram at Tough Cookie Mag, and through there, through the link tree, probably the way that you're going to find um, most of my things. I have a website, and on there you can read the first 20 pages of the first issue as a little preview to see if you like it. And then from there, if you do, you go ahead and buy it.
Awesome. Yeah, and maybe just a final question before that we move on to Scott, and then of course we have more time for questions also when there's audience questions. But what would you say was the most valuable to really boost your career in the beginning? Um, so you said it gave you time also through the mentorship program, or what would you say is the most relevant to
Hmm.
inspire somebody to start a business?
Um, God, that's a hard question. It's quite hard to look back on it because it has been quite a natural journey.
Mm,
I think the thing that helped me the most was not being afraid to ask for what I wanted. I approached so many people and I contacted everyone that I knew and kind of told them with confidence that I was starting something great and that they should support it and follow it and believe in it because it was important and it was making a change. So I think I didn't doubt myself. I had confidence in myself and my business, despite the fact that I had no idea if I was going to make any sales or if it was even going to work. I'm like a big fan of the saying "fake it till you make it" because that's kind of how I developed as a person. I was never a confident person, but one day, I started to kind of pretend to be confident, and over like time, I started to believe it in myself. And I think the same can be said for my business. I wasn't always sure that it was going to work. And anyone that's starting a new business, they're going to have that fear too. But uh, if you say it with your chest and you approach it with confidence, the chances are the people around you are going to believe you and they're going to want to support you because you believe in yourself.
yeah, thanks so much. And then yeah, we will get back later on with the audience Q&A. Yeah, then I would like to go move on to Scott. We had this already as a bit of a cliffhanger, but now we really will move on to Scott. So happy to introduce Scott Elliot, who's a Bergen and Athens-based writer, publisher, and curator, who's currently working as curator of the live program at Bergen Kunsthall in Norway. And he also published an artist novel, The El Dorado Commission, which also received the Scorpion and Felix Awards for International Artist Fiction from the Publication Studio Vancouver. And he's also the founder and editor of Coda Press, and he directs Weekend Server, an institutional model commissioning new works, residencies, and gallery representation. And yeah, today he will talk more with us on the newly commissioned work of Nikima Yagudayev, entitled Basically, that's currently actually still running also at Bergen Kunsthall, and which is focused on creating new modes of gathering and participation and also sharing moments of collective learning. So thanks a lot for joining, Scott, and looking forward to hear more.
Thank you for having me. And Erin, thank you for your presentation of your work. It's really inspiring, and I look forward to delving into it in depth a bit more after today. So, yeah, I'm here to speak about a newly commissioned work entitled Basically by Nikima Yagudayev, which was really a piece that was shaped by this COVID-19 situation and a desire for gathering in slower speeds and questioning the kind of urgency of a live program that we have been very much focused on exponential production all the time. So, but to give a bit of a background as to how I invited Nikima in the first place, I'll talk a bit about the overarching theme for my program, which began, I would say, late spring 2020. So I developed this program entitled Speculative Histories as part of the live program, which was a series of artistic commissions and events that were really investigating these narratives that may have been hidden or underrepresented in institutional practice, and using methods of literary fiction as a means to question what the institution of today could look like if another group of society had been granted more power in the past. So in a way, it is very similar to kind of feminist sci-fi themes, but it felt kind of wrong to be looking ever forward in a moment where we were constantly being told this is a moment of reflection, this is one from which we can learn. So I wanted to kind of flip that on its head and look at a speculative notion of the archive. So through that program, it was looking at contemporary practices of feminist organizing, intersectional, anti-racist, and queer perspectives that suggested alternatives for this institutional practice that was looking towards a reshift. And through this series, which I wanted to also keep generally quite open, was to invite Nikima Yagodayev to make this newly commissioned work. And all I wanted to suggest was that we do a practice about gathering, and that questions this pace that we've gotten so used to. And through our conversations online, of course, we didn't meet in person for quite some time, since Nikima was based in New York and then Brussels. We were talking about an exhibition from the 1970s that took place at Bergen Kunsthall, which was called Samliv, or Common Life. And that was an artist collective who really took over the Kunsthall and utilized visual arts in the institution as a way to talk about very urgent issues about sexual health and identity. But they also kind of hacked the institution. So they stayed open late or past midnight, and they were the guards of the space. And they turned one of the gallery rooms into a place where you could come and get tested. And it was really a splicing of social activism and visual arts at the time. So Nikima and I spoke about this practice at length, and this kind of, it kind of formed a framework or an inspiration to like how we would operate within the space then for the next, what turned out to be a few months. So Nikima's practice is really concerned with gathering in general. Her work engages participants and audiences in these very open-ended situations about deviating and making up space. She's a choreographer and sociologist at her core, I would say. But her practices incorporate food, divination, sorcery, music, clothing, sound, and I guess what she would call like the kind of non-rational practice as well. So similar to a kind of music festival or a traveling fair, Nikima and her collaborators kind of arrive, infiltrate the space, contaminate it, and basically do a takeover. And I wanted to kind of create a festival that was durational in form, and that Nikima would be the curator of that space then. So we kind of shared this role, but she invites people to kind of participate within her work. So she creates a choreographical infrastructure, and within that she explores this competence of the collective. Her spaces propose this very kind of strange element, interested in, from a sociological perspective, I guess, like looking at voids of representation. So she chooses her participants very politically, which was also very suitable for this thematic of speculative histories. She invites many people into these open-ended ecosystems as her companions, with formal dance sequences at the core. But as I said, incorporating like I Ching castings, Qigong, textile production, production of scores. We've made a soundtrack that will be released as a vinyl. I'm wearing one of the tie-dyed hoodies from one of the textile artists we invited. And through this production, we spoke at length. Of course, Nikima was actually able to relocate and move to Bergen for 2 months. And we spoke a lot about this pessimistic attitude we both had towards the schooling system, especially the public school system. And her being American, she felt very failed by this public school system, and the sense of curriculum or lack of funding that just added to a kind of sense of burnout across the board for teachers and students. And she really wanted to question this structural problem and look at different ways of supporting people through embracing that collective mentality. So this piece really emerged as a kind of school structure within the exhibition structure. It was really became a piece about these anti-authoritarian forms of pedagogy that facilitate others, but don't necessarily have the focus of Nikima at the core as choreographer, but allow these other elements to kind of enter and exit as a kind of factory for concept. And it's very tricky to talk about when it is a piece about gathering, to like be in the space, to kind of infiltrate one another, to infect one another in a positive way, kind of like parasiting the institution. But there are some material elements that have come from it as well, like the textile production, and we're making this vinyl record that's also going to be on Bandcamp. And but for me, the most kind of moving part, especially doing this piece through COVID, was to really embrace the collective spirit and to work with other institutions collectively. We did an open audition as part of a dance festival called October Dance with a local institution, and these rehearsals opened up the work to an audience that maybe the Bergen Kunsthall didn't really have at its core. Like wasn't really an access point necessarily for them. So that was also like a really good moment to use this kind of pause or hiatus to really support one another institutionally as well as like artistically. But it's been a mixed, it's an interdisciplinary project, but and it continues. We have the final performances taking place mid-March, or mid to late March, as part of Borealis Festival, which will hopefully be quite well documented as well, and we can share the outcome of this. But at its core, it really is this kind of odd festival. Yeah, I don't know if that gives a detailed enough overview, but yeah.
No, that's super interesting. Actually, it's yeah, it sounds super interesting. I just wanted to ask you a bit about. I think this work was originally already planned when the coronavirus pandemic was already going on. But could you maybe say something on how it's kind of been received so far, or if were there things that were a bit different than originally expected in terms of the reaction of the audience, or how have you been surprised by things that happened that were not originally foreseen?
I think I was really not surprised. It was quite obvious that people were craving this spirit of gathering. And when we did the open auditions in October, it was the first time that I saw 30 bodies in a room moving in unison all together, and it was really quite a lot to take in. Having missed being able to gather en masse. We haven't had so many public manifestations of it, although the gallery space, it's not really a gallery anymore because it's a platform for live production. So I'm also questioning the exhibitionness of the piece. It acts as an open audition space, so people can come and go and interact as they wish, and sometimes they will be met with something very intimate, like doing an I Ching casting or working on a text. And the next day it would be a death metal soundtrack that kind of is really assaulting and kind of attacks the viewer. And I really like that as well, that it has all these waves of intimacy and the exact opposite of that. But for me, I guess it's interesting when you mention publicness, because I used this year as a reaction against this urge to make everything public. And if you're going to make a change, I think it doesn't necessarily have to always be on the stage immediately. And I wanted to use this moment of pause to also support people behind the scenes. And this work became a piece where Nikima became somebody who was just on a basic level providing work for people. So she was inviting a lot of people to come in as collaborators and students and dancers and musicians. And this wasn't public, but it was a form of very quiet activism, I would say, just to keep people employed with a industry standard wage, and to be able to offer kind of that was maybe the most rewarding part of the work. And I think that versus a fully documented video or something, it doesn't really compare. I think there was a lot of things that came out of it that also, like Erin touched upon, just to have that support system around you to allow you to do that, then gives you the impetus to kind of create new work beyond. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. And also, I liked how she described it as a kind of subtle form of activism, kind of infiltrating. Yeah, before we open up to audience questions, I think we also have a bit of time if you want to ask questions to each other, if you have any. I don't know who wants to
Yeah, for
start.
sure.
Yeah, I had
Go
a
ahead.
question for Erin. Well, it's not really a question, but I guess what really struck me when you were talking was this kind of disappointment you felt in the educational system, in that public system, and that you really use an opportunity to go to people with that skill set that you see to be able to absorb something and create something for yourself. I'm just wondering, is that something you wish to set up within Tough Cookie as well, or to create that platform for a kind of tandem production, I suppose?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think, yeah, well, I mean, when I'm talking about like educational systems, I guess it's hard because there's so many different factors that go into why it let me down. But I think essentially it all comes down to the fact that even though you have creative subjects and you have art and you have all of these things, I think the this like rhetoric and this narrative is always pushed that it's not really going to get you anywhere. Like we've all heard the saying that like artists make no money or artists are forever broke. So I feel like for me it was just always like seen as like a bad thing for me to want to choose to be creative. So it is almost like activism in itself to choose to be a creative. And the mentorship scheme, you know, that I did really showed me that and enabled me that. I think through Tough Cookie, it's not something that is, I mean, I guess it is educational to a lot of people in the fact that it gives more privileged people an insight into different issues that marginalized groups are facing, and that can be seen as educational. But at the same time, we're not here to educate people because it's not necessarily our jobs, but we're here to share our stories, and whether or not people learn through that is, you know, another question. But what I would
Mm.
really like to do is just keep Tough Cookie open as a platform for artists to like uplift and inspire and, you know, maybe educate each other, and perhaps other people. I think it's not something that I'm consciously pushing, and I think that can be said with a lot of what I do with Tough Cookie. It's just sort of manifesting itself, and I'm kind of letting it go wherever it wants to go, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, I have a question for you as well, if you
Okay.
don't mind.
Sure.
Um,
Go ahead.
well, I think like similar, you're quite similar to me in the fact that you do a lot of different things, quite multifaceted. And I just wanted to ask you about what your experience has been like managing all of those things during a pandemic, and if there's anything that you can share both with me and with the audience on things that have sort of helped you to continue creating work, because I'm really interested in this idea of productivity during the pandemic. And from what I can tell, it seems like you're doing a lot. So yeah, I'm really interested in that.
I'll be honest and say I found the pandemic very uninspiring. I found it very difficult to inspire myself within my personal practice as a writer and a publisher. And I've been working on a book through my publishing house that has been like getting blood from a stone. Like myself and the artist sent the files to print today, and I was almost in tears. So it has not been easy, and I really have used this year working at Bergen Kunsthall to focus on institutional practice, and that's maybe because I've been very tired, and it's also I've been very privileged to have a job within this period. A lot of people have not. I think the outcome of it will come. Yeah, it will come later. It will be a delayed reaction. I'm interested to see myself what I have learned, because maybe I don't have an answer on that yet. I think we're still reacting bodily to it. I have a very weird reaction to my own body or relationship to my own body at this point. So I'm I'm waiting to see what really comes of it. I think for me, it's just I've had to throw myself into work here as a curator and just stay busy. But my independent practice as a writer or a institutional director or a publisher, I've really just slowed down. And I had to listen to that voice to just say, okay, I do need a moment of reflection, because that pace that I was working at before was not sustainable. I've been getting a lot of Instagram reminders of this is what you were doing a year ago, 2 years ago. And I was like, oh,
Yeah.
that's actually too much, maybe. Like there was a period where I was just traveling all the time, and that's then very hard to, just focus and have these reflective moments that we really need. And the program about speculative histories it became really inspiring to work within an institutional context on that program, because it was also saying, no, you need to stop producing and making hundreds of events a year, which is what we do, and just at least maybe not stop it completely, but question the urgency of certain things. And I think if this year has taught me anything, it's really to just not be so hard on myself when it comes to output. And I think it's a really, I don't know if that's a good answer, but
No,
that's
definitely.
kind of
And
where I
I
am.
really relate. I really relate to what you're saying. And I feel like what you're saying about, usually you're putting on so many things and then you're getting those reminders as well. And it's like, oh, I have to match that year by year. I need to be keeping up that momentum. But something I'm really trying to learn is that saying no is an act of self-care. And just because there are opportunities that present themselves to you, it doesn't mean that you should always take them. You have to learn to set your own boundaries, especially if you're doing things like, you're a founder and an editor, like you've got that intersection between, and it's very hard to create boundaries when you're doing both.
It's too much.
Yeah,
I think like
definitely.
as a writer, I really like try to go very loose and like divide myself into these different characters, of one that is not so reflective and just creates, and then the other one is an editor that's very very reflective and kind of cuts things out. I feel maybe for the last few years I've been that kind of person who just produces. Now I need to start editing within my own practice as well. But I think this year has also really highlighted that artists and creative people take on all of these things. We become this potato of like somebody who can be a multiplicity of roles, And this year I've had to take on quite maybe reluctantly like role of policymaker, because the government here is also like reluctant to say exactly what the COVID regulations are for making events. And when you look at all these like feathers that you have in your cap, it's like, okay, this is very unsustainable. At a point where we're not only supposed to be theorists, producers, blah blah blah, but now we're also supposed to be policymakers as well. So I think just adding that one particular role onto my practice has really highlighted the need for editing, I would say. Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely relate.
Also, by now,
Yeah,
there's
and
a couple of yeah, go ahead, Erin.
Lika, yeah.
I was just going to say one more thing, and then I'll let you take over. But just a moment of solidarity. I also sent my pages to print today. It's a
Amazing.
terrifying moment,
Yay.
but well done for us.
Congratulations. Yes, exactly.
Then I want to go to some of the questions that came in by now from our audience that's joining on the chat. So the first one is for Erin. Of course, being Disruption Network Lab, there was also a question about how do you connect art and disruption? And it would be interesting to hear what's your definition of disruption, since, of
Mm,
course, that's what we work on too.
yeah. Um, I think actually it has a lot to do with the saying that is behind your head, exposing systems of power and injustice. So it kind of like puts it all into like a perfect kind of package. I think for me, disruption is talking about things that are labeled uncomfortable, and speaking about things in an uncensored manner and an unapologetic manner. So for me, disruption is anything that makes someone actively stop and take a second look, take a deeper look. Because I think like we live in like, you know, this age of just being like sucked into screens all of the time, and just scrolling and scrolling and scrolling, and all of our work, a lot of the work is on computers. So for me, what I do, even just with making a print zine, is kind of disrupting that narrative, having a bit of a digital detox, and allowing people that opportunity to stop themselves from scrolling, or flicking through the pages quickly, and maybe there's an idea that they relate to within the pages of the zine, or there's something that stood out to them, or something that's made them really uncomfortable. I think Tough Cookie as a platform started to allow me to talk about the things that I was too scared to say out loud. For example, with my own mental health, or my issues with race or identity or trauma. A lot of people found out a lot about me through the pages of the zine, and that was actually a really liberating and amazing feeling. So, and then it kind of then widened to other artists being able to do that. So I think it really just, yeah, disruption to me is stepping outside of people's everyday comfort zone, because I think, especially in Britain, it's a very polite society, and it's sort of a don't ask, don't tell sort of vibe. And, you know, a lot of people are kind of a little bit scared to talk about these uncomfortable subjects about mental health. So if I can disrupt that and make people uncomfortable, I think I'm doing my job.
Awesome. Then there was a question for Scott, which is also something that we're often thinking about working with communities, because the question was about how you manage to document this kind of open situations that Nikima is creating, because it's very difficult to do this in normal conditions. And yeah, which methods can you use in the current pandemic, especially in terms of archiving the spirit of gathering, which is quite hard.
Yeah, I guess it became a question of urgency. I didn't personally want to impose. I think the documentation question is maybe often an institutional one. We need to have this proof that this happened, and we have a responsibility towards different people to show not only an online audience but also our funders. And I really tried to resist it. And Nikima does not want to document her works like in that way, so I had to really respect her decisions. And I also had this kind of relationship to documentation where I find it troublesome in some ways, especially when it is about intimacy and being there. So yeah, we looked at different ways, and maybe it's not documentation, but it's different forms of output. And there's the soundtrack is coming as a very generous piece of this behind the scenes production. And that will be available in different formats as well, not just the physical vinyl, but yeah, I think that's really it. We've also tried to be a bit more generous in our discussions as well, because I understand that for many people it is hard to maybe get a full overview of the project. So we've done a very in-depth hour-and-a-half long interview between Nikima and I, talking about these structures that will come out soon. And these are just different forms of documentation.
All right, and then there was one specific question. You talked about this collective from the 70s. It did also an exhibition in Bergen. Do you know what the name was of this collective?
Yeah. So the exhibition is Samliv, SAMLALIV. I can write it here in the chat for you. And the collective name is Group 66. Gruppe in Norwegian, so GRUPPE 66. So it was a collective founded in 66. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Cool. Thanks for that. And then, yeah, we have
we actually have an interview. Sorry. We have an interview about that work on the Bergen Kunsthall YouTube, a plug. But for anyone who's interested, that maybe they can also just write to me, scott@kunsthall.no, if they want to find out more about that.
Yeah, that's super. Yeah. Great. Yeah, we can also share that in the chat later. Yeah, then we're kind of coming to the end, but there was a really interesting question. That's actually a question also for both of you. Are you planning for a post-pandemic creative scene, or is that really unhelpful at this stage? So yeah, coping mechanisms for that would be really helpful to hear. So who wants to start on this one?
Erin, do you want to go ahead?
Sure.
I've spoken a bit.
Yeah, it's a little bit of both for me because for a long time I was kind of planning like when is this going to end, when like trying to set a date on things and trying to plan. And I think that type of thinking and fortune telling was unhelpful for me because the situation is just going on, and I think it probably will continue for a long time, or at least until June 21st, which is like our date in the UK of freedom. Um, but again, I'm still not planning because I don't really trust anything anymore. So I think for me, what's been really important for myself and my business is kind of assuming that this is going to be how it is for a long time. Not because that's necessarily the truth, but because I have to stay present and in the moment, and I have to adapt to what's currently going on. But I'm also in a unique position because I launched my business during lockdown, so I've never known anything else in terms of like from a business perspective. Um, I've never met any of my contributors except for the ones that are friends of mine. I've never had a launch party. I've never had everyone in the same space together. I've I've had, the zine stocked in a couple of shops, but I've, not been able to really go and visit them because of lockdown. So I don't actually know what my business looks like post pandemic, and I think maybe that's a good thing because when it does happen, it's going to be so amazing and so transformative. Um, at the same time, while I'm kind of saying it's important not to kind of like fortune tell too much and wonder when is this going to happen, when is this going to end, when can I start to transform my business and make use of things being normal again, and what can I do in that situation. I do think this is a bit of a juxtaposition, but it's equally important to hold on to hope and to have like a plan, even if it's not um, I don't think it should be super strict. It can be quite loose, but quite often I just imagine like what my launch party will look like, and who will be there, and meeting all of these people, these amazing people that have contributed to my zine, and meeting the readers of my zine, and like what that space will look like. That's something that definitely keeps me going on difficult days. So I think depending on the day, depending on my mood, that changes. I dip in and out of both realms. What about you, Scott?
I've been thinking about it a lot. I was recently commissioned to write an essay about programming making events in the pandemic, and it really turned into a rant about my allergic reaction to what I call normativity terrorism, being forced into our homes, having our safe and, for me, queer spaces removed, and it was dreadful. So I think there will be a rushing back to extravagance, which I will have to really resist. I think, like I've read a bit about this being like the Roaring Twenties again. When this is over, that people will really, yeah. And I think we will need to be very aware of pace and not to go back to the way it was, which got us into a certain situation. So for me, I guess most important, if it comes to like providing platform or making events, I think we need to work a lot now, and to take that moment when things go back to whatever normal is, to still resist that pace and to create platforms for people who haven't had ready access to these platforms. Making events in 2020, the first thing I noticed was the ones who were ready and willing to take the stage to do music-based events, for example, were straight white guys who all had their network of straight white guys who were ready to jump on that platform and do it. And to support, to create a diversity that we want to see in these spaces, I think we need to do it behind the scenes. It shouldn't be public. We need to be able to make these structures in solidarity. And I think a post-pandemic, I think that even when it's over, it will still seem too soon. I think we need to do something a lot more, slower paced and durational, inviting this, multiplicity of voices and skill sets and experiences in, which is not or it is possible. It just hasn't been visible when people want to do events, 5 events a week, 6 events a week, and yeah. Does that make sense? I'm sorry. I think it's a bit. It's yeah. My frustrations have really come out. I think, like, especially writing this text about event production, and it's post-pandemic for me doesn't really seem like a very hopeful moment until you make these big changes, which, as somebody who works in an institution, those are institutional responsibilities as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you both so much for sharing all your thoughts and work with us today. It was really inspiring to hear it from you on these 2 examples of what's been going on in Norway and the UK. And yeah, I really hope post-pandemic is closer than we think. But yeah, who can tell? So yeah, a big thanks to both of you. And yeah, I hope also that we can meet again in real life, as Reimagine Europe is almost closing. And of course, also the project meetings are a bit harder. Yeah, then before wrapping up today, I will just say a few words about some of our upcoming events, which are also, of course, all running online for now with Disruption Network Lab. So yeah, we really continue. We look forward to continuing the Disruptive Fridays series for the next few months. So we'll be running editions every 2 weeks. So the next edition of the Disruptive Fridays will be on the 12th of March. And this will be a special edition which is connected to our upcoming conference Behind the Mask. And the topic will be the Q in conspiracy, QAnon as a paradigm for future social media driven conspiracism. And this edition is especially linked to a new book that's coming out by Wu Ming Wan, who's one of the speakers, together with Florian Kramer in this edition. And Wu Ming Wan has a book coming out also in March, which is called The Q in Conspiracy, QAnon and its surroundings, How Conspiracy Fantasies Defend the System. So yeah, this will be happening in 2 weeks on the 12th of March, again at 5 p.m. And then, of course, yeah, our next conference will be coming up. You already saw the trailer at the beginning of this edition, also at the end. So from the 18th till the 20th of March, we'll be having our online conference Behind the Mask, Whistleblowing During the Pandemic, where we will hear from whistleblowers, human rights advocates, journalists, activists, artists, lawyers, and researchers that have all been working on denouncing abuses and wrongdoing in the course of the COVID-19 crisis and beyond. So this is a live streamed conference. There's no need to sign up. And there's also 2 community workshops happening in addition on the 20th and 27th of March. And then finally, before closing today, I also would like to say that there's also community meetup still happening on the 10th of March. And there we will hear from some people that have been working on community response in the fight against COVID-19. And there will be speakers from the Coronavirus Tech Handbook, the Pirate Care Network, and also the COVID-19 Transparency and Accountability Project. So there was a long list of things, but if you want to see them again, of course, you can always check our website or join our newsletter to stay updated. And yeah, thanks again a lot for joining today, and hope to see you online at one of our next events.